I never imagined that loyalty could be punished. If someone had told me years ago that the very people I loved the most would one day drag me into court, I would have laughed and shaken my head. Not my family, I would have said. We're different. But life has a way of teaching lessons the heart refuses to learn until it's broken. For most of my 69 years, I lived quietly, content with little things, the smell of morning coffee, the hum of the garden bees, the satisfaction of knowing that everyone I cared for was taken care of. My husband, Martin, passed away when I was 44. He was my best friend, my steady compass. After he was gone, I devoted myself to our only son, Daniel. Raising him alone was not easy, but it gave my days meaning. Daniel grew up kind and ambitious. I worked double shifts at the hospital so he could finish law school without debt. Every night, I prayed that he would build a happy life, maybe one day give me grandchildren to fill the silence that Martin had left behind. When Daniel met Melissa, I was genuinely happy. She was polite, well-spoken, and always made sure to bring me flowers whenever they visited. "You've raised such a gentleman, Mrs. Reed," she told me the first evening we met. I'm lucky to have him. I believed her. For the next 25 years, I treated Melissa like the daughter I never had. Birthdays, anniversaries, down payments, I was there, always helping, always giving. When they bought their house, I offered a generous contribution. When their first child was born, I took early retirement to help raise little Sophie so they wouldn't have to hire a nanny. Loyalty came naturally to me. Gratitude, I thought, came naturally to others. But gratitude fades when entitlement takes root. It started subtly. Melissa began to question the way I managed my pension. "You shouldn't handle all that paperwork alone," she'd say, smiling. "You're getting older, Mom. Let Danny and me help you." At first I saw concern. Later I saw calculation. Then Daniel began echoing her. "Mom, you're too trusting with people. What if someone scams you? Let us manage your accounts, just to be safe." I didn't realize that safe meant under their control. They convinced me to add their names to one of my savings accounts, just for emergencies. I agreed, not because I didn't trust myself, but because I loved them. Years passed like that. Small favors, little sacrifices. They never seemed wrong until I started noticing how everything I owned somehow had their fingerprints on it. They had the passwords to my online banking. They filed my taxes. They even decided which handyman I should hire for the house. And every time I tried to take back a little independence, Melissa would laugh softly and say, "Mom, don't be stubborn. You raised us to help. Let us." The cracks widened after Martin's old house, the one Daniel grew up in, needed repairs. Melissa suggested selling it. "The market's hot," she said. "You could move into a smaller place, and we'll handle the sale for you." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were calculating. I refused, gently but firmly. That was the first time she stopped calling me Mom and started saying Mrs. Reed. That evening, I sat on my porch as the sun went down. The garden I had tended for decades looked the same, but everything inside me felt different, shaky, uncertain. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, they were family. Surely family doesn't betray family. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "Be careful." And as I would soon learn, that whisper was the only warning I'd get before everything I had built. My trust, my peace, my very dignity, was put on trial. It began with whispers, the kind that echo louder when no one's around to hear them. Melissa stopped visiting as often, and when she did, her smile didn't reach her eyes. Daniel seemed tense, distracted, as if there was something he wanted to tell me but couldn't. One evening, I overheard them talking in hushed tones on the porch. "She's still refusing," Melissa said. "I know," Daniel sighed, "but we can't force her. Then she's leaving us no choice." Those 6 words, "she's leaving us no choice," froze me where I stood. I didn't understand what they meant, but I felt the chill of betrayal crawling up my spine. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed their conversation again and again, twisting with worry. The next morning, Melissa arrived unannounced. She was unusually polite, offering tea, complimenting my garden, even hugging me a bit too tightly. Then she placed a folder on the kitchen table. "Mom," she said softly, "we think it's time you start preparing your estate plans. You know, just in case something ever happens. It's just paperwork. Daniel can handle everything. My heart tightened. Melissa, I said carefully, I'm not dying anytime soon. And even if I were, my affairs are my responsibility. Her smile faltered for just a second. Then she said, Of course, I just thought it would make things easier. For everyone. After she left, I opened the folder out of curiosity. Inside were legal forms, documents that would have handed control of my finances, property, and medical decisions over to Daniel and Melissa. Everything I had worked for, everything Martin and I had built, would no longer be mine. I sat there for hours, staring at those pages. My hands trembled. I realized that this wasn't about helping me. It was about taking from me. That night, I hid the folder in a drawer and locked it. Weeks passed in tense silence. They began visiting less and calling even less than that. My granddaughter Sophie, sweet as sunshine, still came around. She didn't understand the tension. She was only 19, full of dreams. Grandma, she said one day, Mom and Dad have been stressed about money. Something about the house, I think. Money, of course. It always comes down to money. Then one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find an envelope taped to my door. It was from a law firm. My name, Margaret Reed, typed neatly on the front. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a notice. Daniel and Melissa Reed versus Margaret Reed. Civil claim regarding property dispute. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My knees gave way and I had to sit right there on the porch. It wasn't just paper. It was betrayal in black ink. They were suing me. My own son and daughter-in-law. The people I had sacrificed for, the people I had loved without hesitation. They wanted to take my home. I remember whispering to myself, this can't be real. They wouldn't do this to me. But the paper was real. The stamp was real. The pain, far too real. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at the dining table with that envelope in front of me, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time in my life, I saw not a mother, not a widow, not a giver, but a woman who had been used. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I may be old, but I am not weak. They will not take my dignity from me, not without a fight. The next few weeks passed in a blur of fear and confusion. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping it was all a terrible mistake, that any minute Daniel would call and say, Mom, forget that letter. Melissa overreacted, but the phone stayed silent. Instead, more papers came, stamped, signed, and impossible to ignore. The lawsuit was real. My son and his wife were taking me to court over the house Martin and I built with our bare hands. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Martin and I once planned our future. His old mug was still there, chipped but loved. I whispered, What would you do, Martin? What am I supposed to do now? Of course, no answer came, just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old walls. That's when I decided I couldn't face this alone. I walked across the street to my neighbor, Clara. She'd worked for a law firm years ago and always had a sharp mind. She read through the papers, her eyebrows knitting tighter with every page. Margaret, she finally said, this isn't just a misunderstanding. They're claiming joint ownership of your house. They're saying you verbally agreed to share the property with Daniel. I felt the room spin. I never said that. Never, Clara sighed. Then you need a lawyer, someone who can protect you. The next day, I met Grace. She couldn't have been more than 30, but there was strength in her voice and kindness in her eyes. She listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she said softly, Mrs. Reed, I'm going to be honest. This will be tough. Family cases always are. But we can fight this. The documents are on your side. Something inside me unclenched. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt hope flicker. The day of the first court hearing, my hands trembled as I buttoned my blouse. I had never been in a courtroom before. I remember whispering, You've faced worse, Margaret. You can do this. When I walked in, Daniel and Melissa were already there, sitting together at a long wooden table. Melissa was perfectly composed, her hair pinned, her clothes immaculate. Daniel avoided my eyes. That hurt more than anything. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart pounded like it was trying to break free. The opposing lawyer began speaking, painting me as a confused, aging woman who had forgotten promises I made to my son. He said I'd once told them, "Everything I have will be yours someday." I remember saying those words, but as a mother, not a business partner. Out of love, not legality. When my turn came, my voice shook. "Your Honor," I said softly, "I am not here to fight my son. I am here to protect what my husband and I built. I never signed away my home. I never agreed to give it up. I only ever wanted peace in my family." For a moment, the courtroom fell silent. Even Melissa looked uncertain. Then the judge said, "We'll reconvene once both sides present full evidence." As I walked out, I caught Daniel's eye. For just a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who ran to me with scraped knees, crying for comfort. But then he looked away, and that hurt worse than any words ever could. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the moonlight spilling onto the garden. The flowers Martin planted were still blooming. Silent witnesses to everything I was losing. I whispered, "You'd be proud of me, Martin. I didn't run this time." And though the house felt empty, for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. Because courage, even quiet, trembling courage, was starting to take root inside me. The weeks leading up to the second hearing were some of the hardest of my life. Every knock on the door made my chest tighten. Every phone ring felt like a reminder of how fragile my peace had become. Grace visited often, her folders always full of documents and her voice steady with quiet determination. "We're building a strong case," she'd say, "but you have to stay calm, Mrs. Reed. They're trying to wear you down." I nodded, pretending to be braver than I felt. But when the sun went down and the house grew silent, the memories came. Daniel as a child, falling asleep on my lap while I read him bedtime stories, his laughter echoing through the hallway, his first day of school, the way he turned back to wave at me before walking inside. Now that same boy was sitting across from me in court, treating me like a stranger. How did we get here? One evening, I decided to call him, just to hear his voice, to try one last time to make him understand. "Daniel," I said when he answered. There was a pause. "Mom." His voice was colder than I remembered. "Please," I began softly. "I don't want us to fight like this. The house. It's not just bricks, Daniel. It's our home. Your father's memories are in those walls." He sighed. "Mom, this isn't about memories. It's about what's fair. You promised we'd have security. Melissa and I just want what's ours." "What's yours?" I whispered. "Daniel, I worked 2 jobs when you were little so you could go to college. I never asked for anything back." His voice hardened. "You don't understand. Melissa and I need stability. You can't live alone forever. Maybe it's time you let go." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. "Let go?" I repeated. "Of my home, my life, everything your father and I built?" "Mom, please don't make this harder," he said. "We're trying to help you." "Help me." Those 2 words shattered something inside me. "Daniel," I said quietly, "if taking my home helps you sleep at night, then I suppose I've already lost more than a house." He didn't reply. The line went silent. The next morning, Clara found me sitting on the porch, staring at the sunrise. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked. "Not much," I said, "but I think I finally understand something." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That love without respect isn't love at all." She squeezed my hand gently. "You're stronger than you think, Margaret. Don't let them break you." When the second hearing came, Grace presented everything: bank records, property deeds, and the letter Martin had written years ago, leaving the house solely to me. The opposing lawyer tried to twist my words again, implying I was unstable, easily manipulated. But this time, I didn't tremble. When he asked, "Mrs. Reed, did you ever tell your son the house would be his someday?" I met his eyes and said calmly, "Yes, I said that, because I believed I'd always be part of his life. I never imagined he'd want it while I was still alive." There was a silence so heavy you could feel it. Even the judge looked moved. When we left the courthouse, Grace smiled at me. "You did perfectly, Mrs. Reed. You spoke your truth." That night, I sat in the garden again, breathing in the scent of roses. And for the first time, I didn't cry because I finally realized this fight wasn't just about the house. It was about my dignity, my right to exist without being treated like a burden. And no matter what the court decided, I wasn't going to lose that. The third hearing was different. There was a heaviness in the air, like everyone in that room knew something was about to change. I sat quietly beside Grace, clutching the same handkerchief I'd carried since Martin's funeral. Daniel and Melissa walked in together, dressed perfectly as always. She whispered something to him, and he nodded without looking at me. When the judge called the session to order, Grace leaned close and said, "Stay calm. No matter what happens, don't let them see you shaken." I nodded. The opposing lawyer began, parading document after document. Receipts, photos, text messages, anything to suggest I'd informally promised the property to Daniel. But then Grace stood up, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor," she said, "we have new evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims." She handed over a folder. Inside were copies of bank transfers, large sums of money sent from my account to Daniel's over the last 10 years. Thousands of dollars, each labeled temporary help, Grace continued. "My client has financially supported her son and his wife for years. These are not the actions of a woman who denies her family security. These are the actions of a mother who has already given more than anyone could ask." I watched the lawyer's face fall. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I could tell she wasn't expecting that. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Grace called Melissa to the stand. She looked at the judge nervously before taking the oath. Her confidence seemed to waver for the first time. Grace began softly. "Mrs. Carter, is it true that you and your husband received monthly financial help from my client?" "Yes," Melissa muttered, "but it was voluntary." Grace nodded. "Voluntary, of course. But do you recall an incident last year when Mrs. Reed asked you to delay a payment because of her medical expenses, and you became upset?" Melissa's lips tightened. "That was a misunderstanding." Grace turned to the judge. "Mrs. Reed's medical records show she was recovering from pneumonia at the time. She requested a brief pause in financial support, and Mrs. Carter responded by threatening to cut ties." The courtroom went silent. Melissa tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I didn't mean it that way." Grace leaned closer. "Then in what way did you mean it, Mrs. Carter? Because it seems the only time you contacted Mrs. Reed was when you needed money." Daniel shifted, visibly uncomfortable. His hands fidgeted in his lap. Then Grace said quietly, "Your Honor, this case isn't about property. It's about power, emotional power. The plaintiffs have mistaken generosity for obligation. They believe love comes with a price tag. But Mrs. Reed has finally realized it doesn't." Her words echoed through the room. For the first time, Daniel looked up, straight at me. There was confusion in his eyes and maybe just a glimmer of shame. When the judge called for a short recess, I stepped outside for air. The sun was shining, but it felt far away. I sat on a bench near the courthouse steps and whispered, "Martin, I wish you were here to see this. You tell me to stay strong, to stand my ground, and then I realized that's exactly what I was doing. No one was fighting for me out of pity anymore. I was standing for myself, and that, in its own quiet way, felt like victory." Back inside, the judge announced that final arguments would take place in 2 weeks. 2 more weeks until the verdict. As Grace packed her files, she smiled at me gently. "You did wonderfully today," she said. I looked at Daniel across the room. His shoulders slumped, Melissa whispering harshly to him, and in that moment, I didn't feel hate. Just sadness. Sadness for the distance that greed had created between a mother and her child. That night, I went home and sat by the window again. The world outside was quiet. My garden swayed softly in the wind, and I promised myself something. No matter the outcome, I would never again let anyone make me feel small for choosing peace over pain. 2 weeks? That's how long it took, but it felt like 2 years. Every morning I woke up before sunrise and made tea, sitting quietly by the window. Sometimes I read old letters from Daniel, little notes he used to write in college, thanking me for always believing in him. I held those papers like memories slipping through my fingers. Grace visited me twice that week. She said, "Margaret, you've already won, no matter what the papers say in the end." I smiled weakly. It doesn't feel that way yet, but deep inside, I knew she was right. Because even if the court ruled against me, I'd already reclaimed something more important: my voice. The day of the verdict arrived. I wore the same soft gray suit I'd worn to Martin's funeral. It made me feel strong, dignified, grounded. Grace picked me up early. The car ride was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. When we arrived, Daniel and Melissa were already there. They didn't look confident this time. Daniel's tie was crooked, and Melissa's hands were trembling as she sorted through her phone. I wondered if she was scrolling through the same messages she'd once sent me. Sweet, polite words that now felt like lies. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. He adjusted his glasses and said, "After careful review of all evidence and testimony presented, this court finds that Mrs. Margaret Reed is of sound mind, capable of managing her own affairs, and under no obligation to transfer property to the plaintiffs." My breath caught in my throat. He continued, "The court further finds that the claims made by the plaintiffs were motivated by financial interest, not concern for Mrs. Reed's welfare. The case is hereby dismissed." For a second, the world stopped. Grace put her hand on mine and whispered, "It's over." "You did it." Daniel lowered his head. Melissa stood frozen, eyes wide, face pale. As the courtroom began to clear, I turned to my son, the boy I had loved beyond measure. He couldn't meet my gaze, but when he finally looked up, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not regret exactly. Maybe realization. He whispered, "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far." I nodded softly. "But it did, Daniel. And now we both have to live with that." Melissa tugged at his arm, but he didn't move for a moment. Then he turned and walked away. I sat there for a while, breathing slowly, letting the words, "It's over," sink in. When Grace and I left the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like something had been washed away. We stood by her car and she smiled at me. "You know," she said, "there are so many people who never find the strength to fight back." "You did," I laughed softly. "Maybe I didn't fight for money or pride. I just fought for my peace." That night I came home to my quiet house. I made tea, chamomile, Martin's favorite, and sat in the living room, staring at the framed picture of our wedding day. "I did it," I whispered. "I finally stood up for us. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. But peace after a storm can be strange." The next few days felt empty, as if something was missing. Then I realized what it was. I no longer had to defend myself. No more letters, no more lawyers, no more begging my own family to see me as human. Freedom, I learned, can feel both beautiful and lonely. Yet I also knew it was the beginning of something new, a life that was truly mine. The house felt different after the court case. Not quieter, just calmer, lighter. The shadows that once lingered in the corners seemed to fade away with every sunrise. For years, I had lived surrounded by people, but felt invisible. Now, even though I was alone, I finally felt seen, by myself. I started small. Every morning I opened the windows and let the light pour in. I watered my plants, brewed fresh coffee, and played soft old songs that Martin loved. It wasn't about filling time anymore. It was about filling my heart again. Grace came by often. We'd sit on the porch and talk for hours, sometimes about the past, sometimes about nothing at all. She told me, "You know, Margaret, you could help others who are going through what you did." At first, I laughed. But one evening, I sat down with a pen and an empty notebook. I wrote the title on the first page, "What They Took and What I Found Again." It started as notes, then became pages, stories, reflections, little lessons I had learned the hard way. The more I wrote, the lighter I felt, as if every word released a piece of pain I'd been holding for years. Months passed. One afternoon I got a letter from Daniel. It was short, just a few lines. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I hope you're doing okay. Daniel! I sat there, reading it over and over again. There were tears, not of sadness, but something else. Maybe closure, maybe acceptance. I didn't write back right away. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you give in a letter. It's something you grow into slowly when the pain stops defining you. By winter, I had finished my little book. I didn't publish it or show it to anyone. It wasn't for the world. It was for me. I placed it on my nightstand and whispered to myself, "You survived. You rebuilt. You're free." That night, I dreamt of Martin, standing by the garden, smiling the way he used to. He didn't say a word, but I knew what he meant. He was proud. Now when I walk through this house, I don't see ghosts of what was lost. I see proof of what remains. The same kitchen where I once cried is where I now laugh with grace. The same garden that withered is blooming again. And the same woman who once felt small has learned that love, real love, doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from finally choosing yourself. Ending message. If you liked my story, please subscribe for more life stories like this. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? With heartfelt greetings until next time.